Hi everyone, welcome to Better Space Limited, where emerging space economies take the spotlight on our Space Diary Becoming a Space Leader podcast show. I'm Mustafa Agbadi, your host. Strap in tight as you're currently in your front row seat, embarking on a journey to the future of space governance, policy and innovation.
What does it take to lead space law from the global south? In this episode of Space Diaries, Becoming a Space Leader, Ian Grosner, Head of Legal at the Brazilian Space Agency and Chair of the IAF Latin America and Caribbean Subcommittee, shares how Brazil's space law, regional cooperation and global governance are shaping the future of space.
Welcome to the show, Ian.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to participate.
Right. So, Ian, you've been deeply involved in shaping Brazilian national space law. In your current capacity as the head of legal services at the AAB, what, in your own view, is one of the most important regulations within the Brazilian space sector today, especially given its potential as a launching state with strong technical capabilities?
Thank you for the question. So, regulating Brazil's space sector is not only important, but also essential. As a country with strong technical capabilities and a growing role in the international space community, Brazil must have a clear, modern, and coherent legal framework to support its ambitions. In my current role as a head of legal service at the Brazilian Space Agency, I have worked closely on advancing this framework, including the development of the federal law number 14946 of 2024, which represents a significant milestone in our national space policy. This law establishes the legal basis for licensing, supervising, and authorizing space activities in Brazil, in line with our international obligations under Outspace Treaty and related UN instruments. For the first time, Brazil has a comprehensive space law that addresses the responsibilities of the launching state, risk management, and the promotion of safe and sustainable operations. AEB has also issued three key implementing regulations, REB 1, 2, and 3, which provide the technical and procedural details for licensing space activities. These regulations outline the procedures for requesting authorization to carry out space operations, including launches, re-entries, and related support service, with specific attention to safety, environmental impact, and liability. Together, the new federal law and the RMBs establish a structured and transparent regulatory environment that protects public interests, encourages private sector participation, and enhances Brazil's credibility as a launching state. Given our geographic advantage and the infrastructure at the Alcântara Space Center, Brazil has the potential to become a strategic hub for space launches, but that potential can only be realized if investors and international partners have confidence in our legal and institutional framework. In short, regulation is the backbone of a responsible and forward-looking space sector. With the recent legal and regulatory developments, Brazil is taking an important step toward becoming a reliable and competitive actor in global space economy.
Wow, that's quite a robust introduction. So just a follow-up question from the regulations you've made mention of. So for someone to kind of like participate, does the person have to be a Brazilian company, or do they have to like have representation for them to benefit from such kind of, the benefits from these regulations you've mentioned as a private sector?
No. We are open to doing our business with, private companies in general, national, international, and of course with another space agencies as well. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. So our next question will be, in your role at the IAF, I mean, looking at the Latin American and the Caribbean, where you hold a subcommittee role and you've worked to promote regional cooperation within this region. What's some of the unique challenges and opportunities that the Latin American as a region face in building cohesive and effective space governance framework, in your view?
So, as a chair of the IAF Latin American Caribbean Subcommittee, I have had the privilege of engaging with a broad range of stakeholders across the region, from government and agencies and academic institutions to private sector actors and international partners. One thing is clear for me: Latin American Caribbean have enormous potential in the space sector. But realizing that potential requires building cohesive and effective governance frameworks that reflect both our regional realities and global responsibilities. The challenges are not insignificant. Many countries in the region face asymmetries in technical capacity, legal infrastructure, and investment, which can make harmonization difficult. There is also the challenge of ensuring that space is viewed not just as a scientific or defense issue, but as a strategic enabler of development, one that supports telecommunications, climate monitoring, disaster management, and education. In addition, the region must address the lack of continuity in national space policies, often impacted by political cycles and limited institutional memory. However, these challenges also point to unique opportunities. Latin American Caribbean can benefit enormously from regional cooperation, sharing resources, best practice, and even infrastructure. There is strong momentum today, for example, through regional forums like the IAF, the COPUS, and others, to coordinate policy approaches, promote capacity building, and even explore shared regulatory models. I also see growing interest in the development of national space legislation, with several countries now drafting or updating laws to align with international obligations, something Brazil has recently done with the federal law number 14946 of 2024. This creates a valuable space for regulatory dialogue and convergence, allowing us to avoid fragmentation and ensure that the region speaks with a more unified voice on the international stage. Ultimately, Latin American Caribbean are at a turning point. If we can align our efforts through shared governance principles, regional cooperation, and a commitment to sustainable and peaceful uses of outer space, we can position the region not just as user as space technologies, but as an active and influential actor in shape the global space agenda.
Well, that's very interesting. I see Brazil also signed the Artemis Accord that 15th of June 2021, which I mean is also one of the interesting initiatives that the region is also kind of like adopting in terms of shaping the space governance framework within that region. So one of our questions we also like to ask you, this is going to touch more about your work at Corpus when you are the chair of the working group on the definition and delimitation of outer space. We would like to hear your view about what are the main reasons this issue remain unsolved today, which is the delimitation between air and space, and what are the legal or political roadblocks to building a global consensus on the definition of the delimitation of outer space.
Yes, thank you for this question. It's really important for me as a chair of this working group. So, the question of definition, the limitation of outer space, you know, this has been under consideration at Scopus for several decades. As a chair of this working group, I can say that the fact this issue remains unresolved is not due to a lack of technical expertise or legal scholarship, but rather to deep-rooted political, strategic, and legal complexities. At the heart of the debate lies in a fundamental question. Where does airspace end and outer space begin, right? While this may seem like a simple boundary issue, it has profound implications for state sovereignty, national security, commercial operations, and the interpretation of existing treaties. Airspace is subject to complete sovereignty of underlying states, whereas outer space is governed by principle of non-appropriation and is open to free use and exploration by all states. Establishing a clear boundary would therefore have immediate consequences for military surveillance, space tourism, suborbital flights, and even satellite operations. From a legal standpoint, there is currently no binding international rule that defines the exact vertical limit between airspace and outer space. As we know, proposals have ranged from fixed altitudes, such as the Kármán line at 100 kilometers, to more functional or active-based approach, but none has garnered universal acceptance. The challenge is compounded by the increasing blurring of operational domains, which technologies such as reusable launch systems, high altitude platforms, and suborbital vehicles operate in zones that straddle both regimes. On the political side, some states are concerned that agreeing to a fixed boundary could constrain their freedom of action or affect their strategic interests. Others worry that a rigid definition might hinder innovation and commercial growth in emerging aerospace sectors. There is also a strong view, particularly among developing countries, that any definition must be negotiated multilaterally with attention to equitable access and the peaceful uses of space. Despite these obstacles, the working group has played an important role in keeping dialogue open, collecting national positions, and promoting transparency. While a final consensus remains elusive, incremental progress is being made through the sharing of practice and through the broader legal discussions taking place under the umbrella of the COPOS Legal Subcommittee. In my view, the path forward lies in building trust, continuing technical discussions, and fostering a common understanding of the operational realities of modern spaceflight, all while ensuring that any eventual agreements upholds the fundamental principles of peaceful use, sustainability, and inclusiveness in outer space.
Wow, that's actually a robust position you've given us. But our listeners would like to know what's the Brazil position in terms of defining the boundaries between airspace and outer space, and how does this align or differ from other key spacefaring nations?
So, this is important to say in the beginning. As the current chair of the COPOS working group on the definition and the limitation of outer space, I take very seriously the responsibility to act with neutrality and independence. In that regard, I have intentionally refrained from participating in any national decision making process on this issue in Brazil to fully preserve my impartiality That's required of my position within the United Nations framework. That said, I can speak Brazil's official position expressed through its formal interventions at the Legal Subcommittee of COPUS. To date, Brazil has not adopted any definition or delimitation of outer space in its national legislation. The country considers that this matter must be addressed through a multilateral process and waits to the outcome of the international consensus building efforts within COPUS. In its most recent intervention during the LSC 2025, the Brazilian delegation reaffirmed that the issue of the definition and limitation of outer space require a holistic approach and coordinate international action. Brazil has emphasized the importance of involving multiple stakeholders, including states, international organizations, and the private sectors in these discussions. Moreover, Brazil supports ongoing international dialogue, particularly in light of emerging challenges related to space traffic management and the regulation of passage rights for the launch and return of space objects, both with which are closely tied to the question of where national airspace ends and outer space begins. In this context, Brazil's approach is marked by prudence, openness to dialogue, and commitment to multilateralism. The country sees value in maintaining a flexible position while continuing to support constructive international engagement toward a future consensus that reflects both legal clarity and technological realities.
During the recent UN panel in April 2024, you advocated for an international body to manage licensing, dispute resolution, and equitable rights. Could you expand on what open information sharing should look like in practice and how it could be institutionalized?
Yes, indeed, at this UN panel that took place in April 2024, I emphasized the central role of the COPUS as the principal multilateral forum for promoting international cooperation and information exchange in space activities. In that context, when I refer to the need for open information sharing, I meant a system that is transparent, inclusive, and structured, one that can serve both the interests of accountability and the common benefit of humankind. In practice, open information sharing should involve the systematic exchange of data related to space operations, including satellite launches, orbits, reentries, anomalies, and end-of-life plans across civil, commercial, and governmental actors. It also encompasses the disclosure of national policies, licensing frameworks, and sustainability practice in order to foster mutual understanding and reduce uncertainty in space governance. Institutionalizing this form of openness could build an existing mechanisms within corpus while also introducing enhanced functionalities. For example, a centralized and publicly accessible corpus registry could be developed, not to replace the UN Register of Object Launching in Outer Space, but to complement it with richer operational and regulatory data voluntarily submitted by states and private entities. Number two, periodic thematic reporting mechanisms on topics like space traffic coordination, license procedure, or space resource utilization could be established within COPUS, allowing member states and permanent observers to regularly contribute and access accurate information. Number three, a technical interface or digital portal supported by the UNOSA, could enable real-time or near real-time information sharing, including interface with national or regional space situation awareness system, as long as this is done voluntarily and with appropriate confidentiality safeguards. And number four, incentives for transparency, such as soft law instruments, voluntary guidelines, or model protocols, could encourage states and non-state actors to share information, even in the absence of binding obligations. This builds trust and lowers the risk of misunderstandings, especially in a crazy congestional orbital environment. So ultimately, open information sharing is not just a technical measure, it's a confidence building mechanism and one that can help maintain space as domain of peaceful cooperation and mutual benefit for all humanity.
Right. You mentioned congestion of space. We know congestion, I mean, just like we have on Earth, will also lead to some form of dispute in space. Our listeners would like to know, what does dispute resolution look like today in space law? And what kind of disputes are emerging? And how are they typically handled?
So dispute resolution in space law, I can say, is still developing, but we are beginning to see important steps toward more structure and specialized mechanisms, particularly with the growing complexity of space activities and the increasing involvement of private actors, right? So one of the most promising development in this area is the work of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. In 2011, the PCA adopted the optional rules for arbitration of disputes relating to outer space activities, a groundbreaking initiative that offers a tailored legal framework for resolving disputes arising from space activities, whether between states, private entities, or a combination of both. So these rules adapt general arbitration procedures to specific characteristics of space law, incorporate provisions on confidentiality, liability, and scientific or technical expertise. Significantly, the PCA has established panels of arbitrators and experts for space-related disputes, composed of individuals with recognized expertise in international space law, science, and engineering. This allows parties to appoint arbitrators with the necessary legal and technical backgrounds to properly access complex space-related issues, such as satellite collisions, as you mentioned, damage caused by space debris, or disagreements over license and operations. These mechanisms are especially relevant today given the dramatic increase in objects in low Earth orbit, the LEO. The deployment of large satellite constellations, combined with the lack of binding global coordination on space traffic management, makes orbital congestion a growing concern. The risk of collisions, interference, and debris generation is no longer hypothetical. It's a current and escalating challenge. As a result, we can expect corresponding rise in legal disputes over responsibility, attribution of damage, and compliance with international obligations. While traditional state-to-state diplomacy and the UN Space Treaty, such as Liability Convention, remain fundamental, they are not always equipped to handle the fast-paced, commercialized nature of modern space operations. In this context, arbitration through institutions like the PCA offers a neutral, expert-driven, and efficient alternative for resolving disputes, particularly those involving private entities or complex technical assessments. Ultimately, as space becomes more accessible and more crowded, the need for clear, practical, and specialized dispute resolution mechanisms becomes critical. The PCI's optical rules and expert panels represent, in my view, a major step forward in addressing this need and should be more widely considered and supported by the international space community.
Right. So, in adding to what you've emphasized now, do you believe we need a specialized arbitral tribunal or a court dedicated to space law disputes? What would the future of dispute resolution systems in space domain look like in your view?
So the question of whether we need a specialized arbitral tribunal or court dedicated to space law disputes is becoming increasingly relevant. As the number, as I said, of space actors and operations grow exponentially, especially in LEO, we are entering in an era where disputes will no longer be rare exceptions, but rather a routine feature of space governance. The risk of collisions, frequency interference, liability for space debris, and disagreements over resource utilization or jurisdictional authority are all becoming more acute. These evolving realities may well serve as the trigger for the creation of a permanent, specialized body to address such disputes. In my view, a future-ready dispute resolution system in space domain should be practical, independent, expert-based, and flexible enough to handle both state-to-state and state-private or private-private disputes. The model could draw inspiration from other fields of international law that have developed successful specialized forums such as WTO in trade or ITLOS in the law of the sea. One practical and feasible step would be establishment of a dedicated space law chamber within the International Court of Justice. The ICJ already has the legal authority to form special chambers, and the space law chambers could serve to provide authoritative interpretation of international treaties, include the Outer Space Treaty and the Liability Convention. While access to ICJ remains limited to states, such a chamber would send a strong normative signal. It could help jurisprudence in area of the law that still lacks consistent case law. Parallel to that, institutions like the Permanent Court of Arbitration are already laying the groundwork through their optional rules for arbitration of disputes relating to outer space activities and the creation of panels of arbitrators and experts for space-related disputes. These offer an important, flexible mechanism, especially for disputes involve private entities or technical questions. That said, as the complexity of space activities continue to grow, we may eventually need an entirely new institutional architecture, I don't know, like a permanent international space disputes tribunal that can handle licensing issues, liability claims, contractual disputes, and sustainability related cases with standing procedure rules, scientific expertise, and broad jurisdiction. Ideally, such a body would complement, not replace, existing mechanisms like the ICJ, PCA, or national courts, but would offer a dedicated venue equipped to respond to the unique challenges of the space environment. And ultimately, as the space becomes more integrate into global infrastructure and economic systems, the legal system governing it must evolve in parallel. Building a future-ready dispute resolution system is not only about resolving conflicts when they arise, but it's about creating legal certainty, promoting cooperation, and reinforcing the peaceful, sustainable, and equitable use of outer space for all humankind.
Wow, that's a very brilliant conversation we've had there. Our last question now is going to be looking towards the pathway to legal diplomacy in space, and our question for you is centered around your experience being at the center of legal, diplomatic, and academic sphere. What does it take to harmonize national space interests with multilateral space governance and objectives, especially when it comes to economic interest and national pride?
You are totally right. I mean, it's not easy to harmonize national space interests with multilateral space governance objectives, particularly when economic ambitions, security concerns, and national pride are at stake. These are powerful drivers that understandably shape national policies, but they can also challenge the collective commitment to treating outer space as the province of all mankind, as envisioned in our Outer Space Treaty. From my experience working across legal, diplomatic, and academic spheres, I believe that the wild tension is real and growing. International law, particularly space law and multilateralism, remain the only viable path forward. There is simple, no alternative to cooperation when dealing with a domain that is inherently global, inherently shared, and increasingly congested and contested. To move toward meaningful harmonization, we must strengthen the institutions that underpin multilateral dialogue, starting with COPUS and the UNOSA. These bodies already provide a unique platform where states, international organizations, and increasingly the private sector can engage in constructive dialogue, share practice, and work toward consensus based norms. But they are often under resourced and constrained. If we truly believe in a multilateral approach to space governance, then we must also be willing to invest in it with more budget, more technical capacity, and more political backing. Looking ahead, I would not rule out the idea of creating a specialized UN agency dedicated solely to space affairs. As space becomes increasingly integral to a global development, security, climate monitoring, and economic system, there is a strong case for a more centralized and empowered institutional architecture, one that can coordinate efforts across regulation, capacity building, dispute resolution, and sustainability. Finally, harmonizing national and multilateral goals requires leadership, trust, and a long-term view. It means recognize that responsible behavior today ensures access and benefits for all tomorrow. And it also means understanding that sovereignty and cooperation are not mutually exclusive. They can and must coexist if we are to keep outer space peaceful, accessible, and sustainable for future generations.
All right, Mr. Ian, it's time for our orbital round where we ask you a set of quick questions to get some powerful insights from you. So, our first question is, what is the most underappreciated legal challenge in the Latin America's space development?
Budget and capacity building without a doubt. I mean, while legal frameworks are important, they can't function in a vacuum. Many countries in Latin America and Caribbean have strong political will and even draft legislation, but without adequate funding, trained professionals, and institutional continuity, it's very difficult to implement and enforce space law effectively. Legal development needs to go hand in hand with investments in education, technical expertise, and long term policy support. Otherwise, even the best legal instrument risk remain purely aspirational.
Thanks for that. Our next question is, what's one piece of international space law you think urgently needs reform?
In my view, the Outer Space Treaty is a true masterpiece of international law. Its principles remain foundational. But the world has changed, right? So today we urgently face challenges the OST didn't fully anticipate, especially space debris and utilization of space resources, for example. These issues raise serious legal and governance questions. That said, crafting a new treaty in a current geopolitical climate is extremely difficult. A more realistic path forward may be through progressive UN resolutions supported by clear, harmonized national legislation to build consensus and practice over time, eventually shaping customary norms or paving the way for the future legal instruments.
Right. What is the most surprising development you've witnessed in your space law career so far?
So the most surprising and encouraging development has been the democratization of knowledge through new technologies and online education. When I started, space law was highly specialized and limited field. Today, anyone with an internet connection can access high quality courses, webinars, and expertise discussions from around the world, like this one. The accessibility has helped build a new generation of professionals, especially in regions like Latin America, where traditional academic opportunities in space law were once very, very limited. It's transforming the field, making it more inclusive, dynamic, and globally connected.
Right. So, what advice would you give to early career professionals in Brazil hoping to start a career in space law and diplomacy?
So, first of all, seek specialization. Space law is a highly interdisciplinary and complex field. It touches on international law, science, technology, geopolitics, and even ethics. You need a strong foundation, and that comes from focused academic training. But beyond that, you must truly love to study it. This is a field that's constantly evolving, new challenges, new technologies, and new actors are emerging all the time. Curiosity, resilience, and passion for continuous learning are essential. And don't forget, international cooperation is key. Build networks, engage in the global forums, and always think beyond borders.
Right. So that brings us to the end of this episode. Mr. Ian, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us today. But before you go, we have a tradition on the Space Diaries Becoming a Space Leader podcast where we get to ask you a question that was left for you by our previous guest, Professor Von der Donk. And his question is, if you were given a free ticket to Mars, would you take it?
So, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So, I love the sense of humor of my dear friend, Professor Von der Dunk. He never misses a chance to challenge us in the most creative ways. But to be honest, I probably wouldn't take that free ticket to Mars. It's really far away, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of isolation or that kind of rocket fuel. So now a trip to the International Space Station, that's a different story. I would absolutely go, but just for a short stay, maybe 3 days maximum, that would be more than enough to experience the overview of effects, reflect the beauty of our planet and the universe, and come back with a renewed sense of purpose. So yes, I admire the pioneers going to Mars, but I will cheer them on from a little closer to us.
Okay. So thank you so much for tuning into the Space Diaries Becoming the Space Leader podcast. Do not forget to subscribe and follow Better Space Limited for more conversations shaping the future of emerging space economies. Thank you so much, Mr. Ian.
Thank you so much. See you soon, guys.